about 3:10, and you'll leave on his arrival. Track 12, over. Track 12, Fireman Burke at 2:44, 4 p.m. You're off by 1 block. Santa Margarita, over.
This is ex-Southern Pacific daylight locomotive 4449, which was built in May of 1941 for the Southern Pacific Railroad, which pulled the various and sundry passenger trains of the Southern Pacific, mainly built to pull the daylights between Los Angeles and San Francisco. It retired in 1957 in Bakersfield, California, and it was put in a deadline to go to scrap until the city of Portland decided they wanted a daylight locomotive for their park. They came along and found this one in the deadline, and they towed it up there, and it sat there for 17 years. In 1974, the American Freedom Train Foundation was founded, and they needed to find a streamlined, powerful locomotive which was able to pull a train of 26 cars over various and sundry grades over the country. They found this, and they found that it had been well maintained by a certain individual by the name of Jack Holst, who died in 1974, so he never got to see the thing run, and he came down here on his own time and lubricated the spring pad lubricators, and so inside the cab there is a little dedication to him on the back head of the boiler. Anyway, it was rebuilt to pull the Freedom Train, and it toured the country, and then was put back in storage, and in 1981 it was brought out of storage and painted in its original daylight colors, which is orange, red, and black, and came to the California State Railroad Museum's grand opening in May of '81. Went back into storage until 1984, went through a major rebuild, went to the Louisiana World's Fair, returned, went back in storage, and it starred in a movie in 1986 called Tough Guys with Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. And now, since Philip Anschutz has taken over the Southern Pacific Railroad, he is utilizing the locomotive for a public relations tool to get back a lot of business that the railroad had lost over the last few years, and it's now touring the state of California, wining and dining the shippers and various sundry customers of the railroad. The locomotive is capable of speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. It weighs 475,000 pounds with a fully loaded tender, which is 7,500 gallons of fuel oil and 26,500 gallons of water. Across here, this is your steam chest, which actually powers the locomotive. This is where all your horsepower comes from, right here. This is your reverse lever. This is like a transmission in your automobile. You got your forward, neutral, and reverse. The more the engineer brings this rod down in the center, it's more like a high gear in your automobile. In here is all various spools and valves and cables, and this is your piston, which comes out here and which powers this piston rod. Turns this eccentric rod and makes this main rod put all this motion into movement. And at 80 miles per hour, all this weight does 11 revolutions per second. 80-inch drivers. The bigger the drivers on a steam engine, the faster it could go. Tractive effort was not good at slow speeds. At high speeds, it just kept going. This is your blowdown valve. What he's doing here is he's cleaning out the sediment. Fireman's cleaning out the sediment in the boiler. That collects in the bottom of the boiler here. This is your firebox. This is what heats the boiler. This up here is like this is the burner on your stove, and it just heats all the tubes through this boiler, and it heats the water, and it turns the steam, and it goes down to the steam chest and powers the engine. This here is your booster pipe. It speeds up to 23 miles per hour. It can be used for extra tractive effort. It's like a little traction motor inside a steam engine. There's extra engine to get the thing going, get it up to speed. All right, this is the cab in the 4449. That's the engineer's side. In front of you have a maze of gauges and valves and handles and all these other things. Well, everyone's just got a basic function and this is what we're going to talk about. First of all, we'll just start here. This is the radio for communication with the various railroads the locomotive runs over, and right now we're on the Southern Pacific, and so it's hooked up to the SP frequency. Right here, this is an added thing that they put on the locomotive a few years ago, and whenever we need a diesel helper over a certain helper territory, and we can put the diesel locomotive behind the tender of our locomotive and hook up a cable, and then the engineer on the steam engine can operate the diesel through electric cable called an MU cable. You got idle and then run 1 through 8, generator field, and then your emergency stop and your neutral, reverse, or forward. Here is the your speedometer, which of course tells you how fast the locomotive goes, and the locomotive is capable of speeds over 100 miles an hour, but normally the locomotive we operated between speeds of 60 and 70 miles an hour. Here's your sander valve for extra tractive efforts so the wheels don't slip on the track. This is your whistle valve for the air horn. The Southern Pacific daylight locomotives had an air horn on them because the air horn was more audible at crossings than the steam whistle, because the steam whistle, when these locomotives were in regular use for the Southern Pacific, laid flat back into the skyline casing back near the cab, and they were normally used just for calling signals to the various trains and crews. And the air horn is situated right on the front of the locomotive over to the right-hand side of the headlights, so it was more audible. This is your brake valve for the train. This sets the brakes on both the locomotive and train, and this is your independent brake valve, which sets just the locomotive brakes. This is your throttle, which powers the locomotive, and this and this are the two things that make this engine go. They work together, coincide. This is what you're called your reverse lever, or Johnson bar. This is what it's called a power reverse. This is neutral. So you have forward. The more you come back to center, the more you come to high gear. This is like low gear in your car. First, second, third, fourth, neutral, and this is reverse. Back here.
Jay? You know that guy? There's somebody working on the bus.
There's nobody working there. I already looked. There's nobody working. Okay, let's see. The booster pipe, which is what I showed you earlier. This is the valve for the booster pipe. Knock this down and it'll go forward into the booster, and then it'll turn that little extra steam motor for the extra tractive effort. Okay, let's see. This is your air brake gauges, which tells the engineer how much air he's got in his train line. This is your boiler pressure gauge. Right now he's got 265 pounds of boiler pressure in the boiler. Normally, when you're on the road, we run around 300 pounds pressure. This is your steam chest pressure. That tells the engineer how much pressure he's got in the steam pressure he's got up in the cylinders at the front of the engine, which is where your power comes from. This is your level of water in your tender, and this is your booster pressure gauge, which is not operating. That's why it shows 0. And this is your whistle valve for your steam whistle. And your cylinder cocks, when the locomotive's been sitting for any length of time, you have to open these up, and that lets the extra amount of steam and water that's been built up in the cylinders in the front of the locomotive. And so when the locomotive starts to move, the steam comes out and relieves the pressure up there. This is your bell ringer, various cutout cocks. That's about it on this side. These gauges just tell you what's going on here. Like, this is your fuel temperature gauge, and this is your atomizer pressure, which is a steam jet that blows that fans the fire out into the firebox. It sprays it out like like a fan. It sprays it out, so it doesn't just go into one direction. It covers the whole firebox. Boiler pressure gauge again, and this is your steam heat to the train. We've got almost 50 pounds going back there. Right now, Woody's adjusting the atomizer, which is what I just said this was, is the steam being blown into the box down here. And so, there's your fire.